Before we get into today's episode, we just want to preface it with a trigger warning. In today's episode, we will be discussing extremely sensitive subjects like rape, suicide, and violence. So we advise utmost discretion before listening to this episode. That being said, let's proceed.
Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of our podcast, She Said What, where the four of us sit down and have unfiltered conversations about the modern landscape as women. So, today we want to talk about the recent Hathras case, a rape case that has shaken our nation and that has a lot of controversy surrounding it.
So, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to explain what really happened during this case. A 19-year-old girl from a Dalit community was gang raped by four upper caste men when she went to the fields to help her family cut fodder for animals. The incident took place in Hathras, which is in a district in Uttar Pradesh, a state that's already been seeing an increased number of crimes against women, particularly rape cases of young girls. The rapist allegedly tried to strangle her with her own dupatta and they tortured her. This young girl, the Hathras rape survivor, she died in a hospital after 2 weeks of suffering from her brutal injuries. She was, however, able to identify her rapists who were arrested eventually. However, they have not yet been convicted. The state and the officials' response to this rape case is what actually has triggered an outrage of protests. They actually ended up forcibly cremating her body and did not allow the family to conduct last rites, despite her brother or mother telling the officials that they were not okay with having the cremation without these rituals and in the absence of the rest of their family. Furthermore, the officials they followed the brother and mother home and they tried to persuade them to go and light the funeral pyre. The UP government actually claimed that the protests against the incidents are part of an act of a foreign funded international plot to cause caste and religious riots in the state and to try to topple the ruling government, all motivated by jealousy of the state's development and the record of development. Furthermore, they told the Supreme Court that they'd actually cremated the body at night due to quote unquote extraordinary circumstances and a sequence of unlawful incidents. And so, what the story is, it's a story of unequal balance of power between the state and some of its most disadvantaged citizens. This, coupled with the officials' disregard for protocol and their seeming unconcern for the grieving family, who would just try to come to terms with the tragedy.
With this rape case, there have been a lot of violations of general protocol, and there is a lot of speculation as to why this has happened. One of the deviations from the norm has been that the government, instead of working to help and to support the family, is working against them. They are trying to prove that a rape didn't happen. And why would you do that? These are some of your most, as Risha said, some of your most vulnerable citizens. You have to stand up for their rights because they can't do it themselves. One of the examples of this is that there are video clips showing this, that the district magistrate showed the family into changing their statement. He sat and threatened them, intimidated them, and asked them to recant or say that the rape didn't happen, and asked them to stop bringing the police under fire in the eyes of the media. And another thing that happened was the body was burnt without the consent of the family. And again, this perhaps this was to prevent a second post-mortem, we will never know. But what the police did was that usually under general protocol, and this is in the criminal procedure code in the constitution, medical samples of the rape victim need to be taken within 24 hours of the rape or 24 hours of when the rape has been reported. But in this case, the samples were taken after 11 days. This time lapse essentially rendered the samples worthless. Because of this, the quality of the investigation has been compromised and it can't happen properly. And because the rape kit was administered so late, there were no stains of semen in the body. And again, I just want to say that the Constitution says that for something to classify as rape, there need only be penetration. There does not need to be semen. But the victim's family and the victim at the time were not aware of this. So what the police did was that they convinced them because there was no semen, there was no rape. But the Constitution clearly states that this is not a requirement, again, because of the possible delays that can happen with the administration of the rape kit. They said that there was no rape. They ignored what the victim was saying, they ignored what the victim's family was saying, and they just wanted to believe what they wanted to believe.
Another inconsistency that we can note throughout this entire case and how it was dealt with was that There's an article that was published by the Times of India where they said that the district hospital where this 19-year-old victim was first brought in, after she was raped and everything, the CCTV footage from that hospital on that particular day was not found at all. And when the hospital chief medical superintendent was questioned about it, he said that the previous footage gets deleted every 7 days and new footage gets recorded over it. So they said that the CCTV footage was allegedly not saved from that day. And not just this, but even Hathras, like the area in itself, has been militarized now. And when other politicians are trying to enter the area and they're trying to help the family or things like that, then outsiders are not allowed entry into Hathras because they're told that, okay, there's COVID cases and we can't allow you to come because it's quarantine and self-isolation and all these things. But the area has literally been militarized, again, not by police officers, but literal soldiers with arms and everything. The area has been completely militarized. And with all of these inconsistencies and all of these quite shady things, that leads us to question what is actually going on with the case.
Exactly. I feel like adding on to the inconsistencies, right? There were tons of factors that came into play that made the victim more vulnerable than some other rape victims we've seen in the past, right? And I think a major factor highlighted here would be casteism and caste in general. So we know that the caste system has been a solid, rigid body for years in society, right? And it's been diligently followed by so many people. And I would like to literally quote the definition, and it basically is any kind of prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of caste. So I personally feel like as a society, we have gone past that. We are making slow attempts to get rid of casteism as a whole. But again, there's so many injustices being done to Dalits as such, even today, because this case, let's take this case for an example, right? I don't know what type of dominance is coming out here. Where are you trying to put her caste down? Are you trying to strip her rights away just because she's a Dalit? Is that why this attack was done in the first place? Is that what you're trying to do? You're trying to put her down just because she's a Dalit? You're trying to take her rights away, not giving her a voice?
Throughout history, there have been these patterns of denial that have come about, which try to argue that caste does not, in fact, play a role in rapes. And this actually favors members of the upper caste, and it continues to deny equality and deny equality to Dalits and lower caste members. And there have been several instances of this. So I want to highlight one case. So going back to 1995, there was a woman named Bhanwari Devi, and she was a Dalit social worker from Rajasthan. She was gang raped by higher caste men and was ill treated by the police as well as the court. And in fact, a state MLA actually organized this victory rally in Jaipur for the 5 accused who were declared not guilty. People in her district and her caste called her liar, and she was outcast by even her family. The judgment made by the High Court during this case said that upper caste men could not rape a lower caste woman because they wouldn't even deign to touch her. And so they essentially invoked caste as a way to deny rape. This is just one among hundreds and thousands of these atrocities that have taken place against women, particularly women of disadvantaged castes, in the past decade or so. And the majority of these cases aren't even reported. And so it's basically obvious that caste does play a role, and there is an intersectionality that exists. Possibly one reason for this is because violence against Dalit women and girls is used as a tool by the dominant communities to shame the Dalit communities and to assert their dominance. And so, as I mentioned, there is an intersectionality that exists, and that needs to be addressed.
So, just in case some of you don't know what intersectionality is, it can be formally defined as the complex cumulative manner in which the effects of different forms of discrimination combine or overlap or intersect. And what this essentially means is that you can't, when you identify as a feminist, you can't just look at a woman in a position of disadvantage only because of her gender. She is a member of multiple communities. There is a multi-layered aspect to this discrimination, and you have to understand that the patriarchy not just permeates through gender, it permeates through so many levels. Like caste, for example, is one of them, and over here this is the one that we want to talk about. So we need to understand what intersecting discrimination really means. We can't just think of gender-based violence as gender-based violence. We need to know that this violence and the way that it's being received in society changes because of the caste that the woman belongs to. For example, with the Nirbhaya case in 2012, No one was against the rape. No one questioned whether or not it happened. Again, it can be argued that the evidence was perhaps far greater, but no politician questioned that she was raped. Everyone went and administered their support to her. Laws were changed after the case to ensure the protection of women. Then why are politicians behaving so differently here? What is the difference? I don't really have a definite answer other than caste.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I honestly think that this matter is very, very like intersectional. And I just want to like take a hypothetical situation again, right? God forbid this actually happens. But if one of us were to be in that particular situation, then I feel like our case would be taken a lot more seriously, or would be at least considered actual rape, just because we come from like a higher socioeconomic status and come from like upper castes or whatever. And I think that that's again wrong, because you can't, rape is rape at the end of the day, right? And you can't classify how bad a rape is just because of somebody's like socioeconomic status or their caste or whatever, right? And I think that's completely wrong. And it starts with like the police not taking the rape seriously and things like that. But even if you look at it in media, like, first of all, the media picks and chooses which rape cases they want to report, right? Because it's very, very unfortunate that things are like this. But because of how common rape is in India, and it's one of like the most commonly committed crimes in India, nearly every single day we see like in media a new rape case is being reported. But again, when media picks and chooses these cases, they are less likely to try to further the cause of like a Dalit woman being raped or a Dalit person being raped. They again want to further the cause of people from higher socioeconomic statuses and upper caste people, because in some senses, and even when like the district magistrate was trying to convince the victim's parents and everything, it's sort of like they're trying to justify that like the rape was okay just because she was from a lower caste and everything. And I think that's completely wrong. Like, you can't, a human being is a human being, first of all. Like, casteism, I think that we're on the way to kind of combating it, and I think that that should continue. But I think that irrespective of the a person's background, like, nobody deserves rape, and rape is a very, very like serious thing. And just because somebody comes from a specific caste, that doesn't give you basis to completely invalidate what they went through.
What we need to know here is that the oppression faced by Dalit women is multifaceted. Not only are they oppressed by men, right? They are oppressed by all genders of from upper caste communities. The caste system is such that there are hierarchies within lower caste as well. So Dalit women, for example, the woman who got raped, she would probably have also been oppressed by higher levels of the Dalit community. Untouchability right now is still persistent in India. We don't afford our domestic help the same opportunities that we afford ourselves. And this isn't just because of socioeconomic status, this is because of like ingrained systematic casteism. And we tend to dismiss violence against minorities, caste specifically, because this is, and a lot of people's justification for this is the way it has always been, and so this is the way it must continue. And I just don't think that's okay, because the stigma and the intolerance that surrounds these people, we need to move as a society to get rid of it. And why did it take such a violent rape case to bring it to our attention? Because this has been going on for ages and ages. This isn't, caste doesn't just play a role in rape, it plays a role in daily life. It happens right in front of us and all of us ignore it. We should not have had to wait for such a horrible thing for a Dalit woman to die for it to make headlines.
Exactly. And I think that, like you said, when we talk about gender based violence, we sometimes forget that violence doesn't happen in isolation. And there are a lot of factors, or as we mentioned, intersections that contribute to it. And one of the most dangerous of these intersections is that of caste. Women and girls from disadvantaged social groups, they do face additional vulnerabilities and are at a greater risk of gender based violence. This is a fact. And so the government, the authorities, we need to do more to help these disadvantaged groups. And so maybe the first step that can be taken by the government is to perhaps implement laws, but laws are not enough. There has to be this fundamental change within communities, and to break down the mindset that in the first place, gender is caste discrimination. That has to be the first step, just the grassroots level, and then we have to educate. There's so much that needs to be done.
Yeah, I feel like, and I want to make a reference to what Inika said earlier, right? About how we see the results of this existing casteism in our daily life, right? It's not like it's so we notice it every day that it just goes. We don't think about it too much. Like nowadays, a lot of homes, right? We have a separate servants' quarters for like the women and men that work in our homes. We're completely dividing caste. Casteism is literally everywhere we go, and because of how common it is, we it goes unnoticed, right? We literally don't eat off the same plate like the women and men that work in our homes. We don't let them sit on tables with us. It's that division that we have been following, and I feel like there needs we don't realize how wrong this is unless something like this happens, right? As Anika said, unless we see that oppression on a larger scale in media, we don't realize that we are actually blindly following this. We're blindly following the caste system without realizing that we are a part of this big rat race that everyone is running towards.
I completely agree with that. And I think that there's like a lot of, like Pearl said, like there are a lot of really, really small things, like microaggressions in a sense, that we partake in. And like we didn't, honestly, I'll be the first to own up to this. Like I didn't know half of the things that my household was doing were wrong. Like having separate utensils for your household help, or not allowing your household help to sit next to you, to sit at the table with you, and making them like sit on the floor, or giving them like the leftover food instead of like giving them a portion of your freshly cooked food, and things like that. Just like the smallest things, I didn't realize that those were actually wrong, and I didn't realize that those were genuinely like caste based microaggressions. But after educating myself on the matter, I found that, again, I think all of us have realized that these things are wrong, and we are consciously making attempts to not follow the same construct. And I think that one of the other things that just goes unnoticed, just like this, is kind of the way that rape and violence is spoken about, right? It's like, if you look at it, when rape is reported in media or like by people, whenever we just like speak about it, you say, this person was raped. And it's a passive voice that's used. And you don't say, this person raped this individual. Like, you don't frame your statement like that. You just say, this person was raped. And that passive voice, that voice that's like used, and that entire sentence construction in itself is kind of removing the agency and removing the blame in a sense, because you're making all of the focus come onto like the victim, and like, okay, this happened to this particular person, but you're not going into, this was done by this individual, and this individual needs to be condemned for their actions. And I think just that small thing can, again, is a really micro thing that can lead to a bigger thing, you know. And I think that that's one of the things that we don't realize, but I think we should consciously make attempts to not speak like that anymore. Like we need to consciously make attempts to change our mindset and how like people like respond to rape, right? Because I mean, even if you look at it right now, the way that people are like responding to rape, again, not us, I would like to think, but a lot of people like across India, there's so much victim blaming, and there's so many times when like people will try to justify the rapist. Like they'll say like, okay, I think one of these like politicians, I'm not going to name names, but one of them said that like sex is a natural urge in men, and so it's justified. Like this was bound to happen. Like no, rape is not just bound to happen. That's not. It's not something that can be justified. Like irrespective, what the victim was wearing, what time of night the victim was roaming around, none of that is reason to justify rape. Like rape cannot be justified no matter how much you try. It's wrong and it will remain wrong. So I think that what's fundamental is that we need to change like our mindset with these things, and it starts with like the smallest things of how we report these cases, right? Like instead of saying this person was raped, let's start saying this individual raped this human being, you know. I think that those kind of changes are definitely needed to sort of enforce a societal reconstruction.
Exactly, Sanjay. I think everything you said was so true. Many times we focus for some reason on the victim. The focus is on the victim. They are met by this series of should haves that, you should have worn something different. You should have worn a skirt. You should have stayed with your friends, not walked into that dark alley. And so, why is it that the victim is the one who has to change the way that they act? Why is it that they are made to question themselves and they are made to feel guilty as though they were the ones who were in the wrong? And like you said, we have to break down this mindset. The time has come. All of us need to understand that a few inches of fabric, something as trivial as that, does not define your safety. Rape is a very, very, very serious issue, and it's no laughing matter. The very act of a rape is It's completely inhuman, and no person should ever have to go through such a horrific ordeal. The after effects of rape are just as bad. It can lead to months, years, even a lifetime of trauma and fear, and it can affect one's mental health as well as their physical health. For example, I think about 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago, a 15-year-old girl, again from Uttar Pradesh, was raped, and she actually ended up committing suicide because she couldn't deal with the shame and the society's response. Because actually, the government and the court, they didn't do much to help her out. And then after she committed suicide, her father actually ended up committing suicide as well. And so I think, like you said, the process of recovery from a rape as well can be very, very grueling, very taxing for the family as well. And so I think like you, oh my God, sorry, how do I end this? I think definitely societies have changed the way that they view rape, the way they talk about rape. And it's only once this happens that perhaps the plight of those who are victims can be changed.
Exactly. I feel like adding on to that, I think the main problem is that people don't accept, like in a lot of villages and underdeveloped areas, right? People don't accept the fact that this is a pertinent issue, right? So I was watching this video, I'm being honest, and there was this old man in Haryana who was saying that tali kabhi ek haath se nahi bachti, and that really caught me because he was talking about how when a rape happens, right? When a woman or a man, for that matter, is raped, he basically justified that by saying that both of them are responsible for what happened. It's not just the man or the woman who was the dominant character in it, but it's also the one who was being put down. And I just didn't get that because it's just that the consent, the whole deal about consent is not taken seriously in a lot of societies in India. It's still considered like you don't need consent when you're raping. You can just do whatever you want. It's your choice. And I feel like that whole deal about consent, right, is so important because people don't understand. People think it works both ways. Rape does not work both ways, all right? We need to get that cleared out. It's always someone who is dominating themselves and not letting the other person voice their opinion.
I think I watched the same video that you did, Paul. That I think it was like a video titled "This is why Delhi is the rape capital of India" or something like that. And in that video, like the interviewer was going around and just like interviewing older men, and he was kind of just asking like what are their thoughts about like rape and things like that. And he was asking general questions. And then I was really shocked to watch that video because in that video, a lot of the men, they were just saying that like one of the men went to the extent to say that rape is consensual. Like literally, like Pearl said, rape is not consensual. Like that's not how it works. And if sexual activity is to happen, it should happen consensually, and consent is key in whatever you are trying to do, right? Because if you don't take consent, that is rape. And rape is not consensual. Rape is not when both parties are agreeing to engage in this activity. That's not what rape is. And I think that, like I said, society needs to be reconstructed because victim blaming and just saying that like, okay, no, if a woman has like long hair and if she's laughing, then like obviously a man, his like, sexual urges or whatever, he can't control it, and like men will be men and all of these. First of all, that victim blaming justification, that's never like a thing. Like that should not be a thing for rape. And second of all, like why are those the gender constructs? Like if a woman is like laughing, then like, okay, yeah, she's trying to like flirt with a man and things like that. And again, I think that like Paul rightly said, rape doesn't just happen to women, it does happen to men as well. But because it's been statistically proven that it does happen more frequently in India to women, I'm just taking the case of women, that just because a woman is laughing, just because her hair is untied, just because she's wearing shorts or a skirt, or just because she's wearing a loose top or things like, that's not an excuse, and that's not a justification, and nothing is ever a justification for rape. Because like Risha said, there's so many lasting effects of that, and you can't just I just have there is no justification for rape, and that's wrong on so many levels. And instead of trying to convince families that the rape is the victim's fault and trying to say that, oh, okay, your daughter has been raped and like that's a disgrace for your family and things like that, instead of shunning like that, listen to the victim and try to understand that it's not, they're not trying to do this for like attention or something. Like there are so many lasting effects of this act. You can't completely invalidate that just because you think that the rape is like justifiable, because rape is never justifiable.
And I wanted to add on to something that Sen said and just look at the perception of rape and rape victims in our country. So I think, and this has been going on for a very long time, But rape and sexual violence in India specifically, but in other countries as well, has been used as a political tool to kind of oppress and silence women and dominate them. And I think rape victims in our country receive justice so rarely. And why is rape being commercialized in the form of TV shows more often than victims receive justice? I don't get that. And it's just, again, going back to the perception, right? Like Risha mentioned that a rape victim committed suicide and then her father committed suicide as well. Why is this? This is because rape victims are the ones who are forced to feel humiliated, not the perpetrators. In India, women already have a disadvantaged existence. Retelling your rape is already traumatic, but then to tell the story without taking into concern the woman's perspective, what she went through, just adds insult to injury. And the state has been so insensitive about how they represent violence against women. The words they use and the narratives they select, they are selected to fit into the appropriate socio-political atmosphere. It's not just about rape, it's about how rape is viewed in the wider society for politicians. Why are we connecting someone's virginity or someone's or sexual values to honor? Like, why is it that when someone gets raped, they lose their honor and they lose their value in society? That's not okay, because if anything, shouldn't the perpetrator be the one who's losing their value in society? Why have we shaped our society in a way that blames the victim and ruins the victim's life more than the perpetrators?
I think the key takeaway from like our entire discussion today is basically that we cannot stay complacent about this. Like we need to stop trying to like normalize rape. And as pathetic as this sounds, just because rapes are reported every single day, we shouldn't just sit back and accept that as the new norm. Like we need to take action against these things because this is wrong, irrespective of whether the rape happens to a woman, to a man, to a non-gender conforming human being. Rape is happening, that is not justifiable, and you are taking away so many things from that human being just by raping them. And we need to stop staying silent about it, we need to stop normalizing it. So how can we do these things, right? Okay, specifically for the case of the Hathras victim that we just discussed today, there are a lot of resources that we will be linking on our website. There's specifically a few petition links that you can sign. There is also a draft email that you can send to authorities, but please, when you're copying that email, just change a few words and sentences, as these people block multiple similar emails. So along with having a draft email, we also have like email IDs to send these emails to. And again, if you are done with all of these things and if you want to do more, there are protests going on. Again, we do not advise that you leave your house given the current situation, but if you are attending protests, please make sure that you're wearing masks and practicing social distancing and having your whereabouts being tracked by 2 to 4 family members at all times. Again, just be very aware of your surroundings. And in the broader context of not just the Hathras victim, right? To combat casteism on its own, there are a lot of things that we can do, and it starts with us. It starts with breaking down those microaggressions that we spoke about, right? And on our Instagram page, we do have a 3-step plan to combating racism, and it's very small steps that I think all of us can implement in our lives. So we do highly recommend that you please go have a read and just try to implement those changes in your life as well, because casteism needs to be broken down. And again, just to tie this up, right? Rape is never justifiable, and rape should not be normalized. Just because rape is one of the most common crimes in India, that doesn't mean that we can normalize the narrative. Every time a new rape case is reported, it's not, again, this sounds pathetic, but it's not just another rape case. Like, we need to stop normalizing these things. We need to start speaking up against it. And it starts with us, it starts with educating ourselves, educating the people around us, and just anytime you see these kind of like ignorant statements like Pearl and I discussed today, when people are saying that like, oh, the rape was the victim's fault, or like she shouldn't have been wearing that, stand up against that instead of just normalizing that. It genuinely does start with us and the people around us. And as soon as we start educating ourselves and the people around us, I think that's when the real change can happen. Okay, guys, that wraps up today's episode of our podcast, She Said What. But wait, before you go, if you're listening to this on Spotify, then feel free to text us on any of our social media with any questions or comments about today's episode or just in general, and we'll be happy to reply to you. If you're listening to this on Instagram or YouTube, then just leave us a comment in the comment section below and we'll reply to that as well. That being said, thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and we'll see you next time.